Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Fireside Chat with Jessie Liu, and welcome to AEF. We are a 501c3 nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and we were organized to really help support APA law students in the Washington, D.C. area through scholarships, programming, and hosting skills-based events, and also hosting wonderful events like this Fireside Chat. Today, we will be having a wonderful conversation between Hui Lei, who is one of AEF's great board members, and he is also by day an attorney at the Department of Justice. So thank you all for attending this wonderful event. I understand that we have attendees from all across the country, so we're very excited to have you all. If you guys have questions, please feel free to direct them to the chat, and we'll direct them to Jessie over the course of this conversation. Once again, welcome to the chat, and I'll kick things off to Hui.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you everybody for joining us today. So great to see such great turnout. But most importantly, thank you, Jessie, for generously donating your time. As everyone in here, I'm sure they're very eager to hear about your experiences. And as Adam alluded to, there are folks not just from the DMV area, but beyond. So thank you very much for taking the time. Some housekeeping matters at the outset. We'll allocate about 10 or so minutes at the end for questions. If you have questions throughout this event, please do drop it in the chat, either to everyone or to myself or Jamin or Pava AEF account. Other than that, please do stay muted in the interest of time. And without further ado, we'll kind of hop right into it. Let me first just introduce Jessie and give a quick overview of what she's been up to lately. I won't go through her entire CV because that might take up the entire event. So we just hitting the highlights here and what she's been doing lately. Jessie recently re-entered the private sector by joining Skadden as a partner in the government enforcement and white-collar crime group. In this capacity, her work focuses on a variety of matters, including government and internal investigations and complex litigation involving government entities. From 2017 to 2020, Jessie served as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, leading the nation's largest U.S. Attorney's Office. In that role, she oversaw matters of national and international significance involving corruption, fraud, and national security. Before joining the U.S. Attorney's Office, Jessie served as the Deputy General Counsel for the Department of Treasury. And prior to that, she had various roles within the DOJ, including Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division, Counsel to Deputy Attorney General for National Security Issues, and Deputy Chief of Staff for the National Security Division. Jessie obtained her JD from Yale and her BA from Harvard University. Whew. Okay, Jessie. So the theme and the title of this event is Generating Your Path as a First Generation Law Student. And I kind of want to parse that out into two different topics. Kind of one, your experience as a law student, as well as your experience entering the legal practice as an attorney. So as a first generation Asian American, what made you want to go to law school?
Well, first of all, Hui, thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and thank you to AEF for having me. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to tune in today. I was an AEF board member from 04 to 06, so this is like coming home. It's such a great organization, and I miss it, so it's nice to be here with all of you. So I have to say this sounds a little bit silly, but I grew up in the 80s, watching a lot of legal shows, and that's not unique to the 80s. I feel like there are always a lot of legal shows, but really just from watching TV, because I did not really know anybody who was a lawyer. There were a couple of high school classmates whose parents were lawyers, but there was no one that my family was a lawyer. My mom and dad came from Taiwan in the early 70s. And my dad is a scientist. He's retired now, but he was a chemist for many years, and he came here to the United States to continue his studies after going to college in Taiwan. And so, they really knew nothing at all about the US legal system when they got here, and they didn't know any lawyers. And so I really didn't, I knew a lot of family friends, aunties and uncles who were scientists and who were doctors, but we didn't know any lawyers. And so I really was first exposed to the law by watching television. And it was an interesting decision to come to decide to be a lawyer, because I was also incredibly shy growing up. And so it just didn't, but I had this, as I was watching, these fictional lawyers on TV, I had sort of such admiration for the way that they seemed to be able to assert themselves and to speak up, which is something that I felt like I had a lot of trouble doing when I was growing up. And that was not all that strongly supported kind of in the culture where I grew up. I think especially as an East Asian American girl growing up, the message that I got from my parents and some of the family friends was that it was, a little off-putting to speak up. You certainly didn't argue with your parents or with your teachers or, with your elders. And what you really should be focused on is just working very, very hard in school. And if you, did well, then good things would come to you. So, even thinking about being a lawyer was a little bit of a rebellion, and it was kind of breaking new ground in terms of just the background that I grew up with.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, that's great that you were able to recognize your characteristics and take it head on. Not too many times I hear people are inspired to go to law school through television, though. So that's pretty awesome too. Do you remember any of the shows that, or do you care to share?
So, when I was growing up, there was a show called LA Law, which was one of these shows in the 80s, crazy cases. In many ways, I think law TV shows about law are much more dramatic than the day-to-day life of a lawyer. But in other ways, I think being a lawyer and certainly working in the government as a prosecutor, sometimes the stories are stranger than fiction. So that was just neat, because it seemed like every week when we tuned in, not only were people doing wrestling with very interesting cases and issues, but they seemed to be having a great time doing so. And they were always really, really well dressed too, which is also, a plus. And I was like, wow, this sounds pretty cool. I was developed an interest in being a prosecutor fairly early on as well. I actually remember when I was maybe 13 or 14 reading an article about Rudy Giuliani, whose public profile I think has changed a little bit since those days. But at the time, he was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and U.S. News and World Report, which I think is now defunct as a print publication, but used to be, a big deal. And I saw this article about Rudy, and it talked about how he was fighting the mob in New York, and that he had to take a different way home every day to preserve his own safety, because he was afraid that he might become a target given his work prosecuting the mob. And that he was cracking down on Wall Street greed and corruption, that he was, fighting insider trading and, fighting fraud in the financial system, and kind of, doing all this really neat stuff. And I thought, that's something that I want to do someday. And so, strange as the story is, sometimes, Rudy was an early inspiration as well.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. Well, I guess we're now we talked about what inspired you to go to law school. Let's kind of shift gears and talk about your experiences during law school. As first gen law student, did you encounter any challenges in law school? Any obstacles that you experienced specifically from your perspective as a first gen law student?
I think that there are definitely challenges. associated with being the first in your family, probably to do anything, I would think. But, since we're talking specifically about law school, I can be a little bit more detailed about that. And, I was lucky because my parents were well educated. They were very supportive of my education. But I think one key thing that I realized when I went to law school, even though I had, gone to college and gotten to know a lot of people from different backgrounds in college, when I set foot in law school, I realized that there were a lot of things about the legal world that I didn't know, that some of my classmates who had parents who were lawyers or who had family friends who were lawyers had a much better sense of. Like, for example, I didn't know, anything about clerkships. I didn't know anything about law journals. I just had never come up in my life. But probably the thing that was most foreign to me was the idea of networking. And I don't really like to use that term, but in terms of, and you can call it relationship building. I think that's in many ways a better term. Um, and I think this is true, across a lot of different professions, but it definitely is true in the law that, and I know that AEF and APABA DC, for example, do a lot of programs on this and talk about this a lot, but a lot of success in the legal field comes through having mentors, having sponsors, having people who can show you the ropes if you go to a new job, whether that's a law firm or in government, people that you can bounce ideas off of when you're thinking about making a career change, people who can say to you, hey, you've told me that you're interested in XYZ kind of work. I hear that there's a really neat job position opening up, somewhere, and, let's talk about it. Let me connect you with some people. I really had no idea how that worked in, the legal and business world in the United States. I mean, my parents just didn't do that. They socialized with a pretty small group of other Taiwanese graduate students and professionals. And they would even sometimes say things like, gosh, it costs money to socialize. So like, why would people do that? It's like, having people over and that kind of thing. And, because they were quite conservative about spending money and about their financial situation. My mom actually would wash out used Ziploc bags and then dry them so that she could use them again. And she still does that. And she's completely frustrated that I don't do it. And sometimes I do it because it just makes me feel funny to throw away a Ziploc bag that's been barely used. And my husband's just like, what are you doing? It could be contaminated with salmonella, like throw that thing away. But so I had no real sense of kind of that aspect of professional success. I understood from my upbringing, like I understood working hard, I understood studying hard, I understood getting good grades, but I just didn't have any conception of how important relationships are to success in the legal field, whether that be at the law school level, really getting to know a professor and getting recommendations for clerkships or for jobs down the road, or later in your professional life, developing mentors and sponsors, and also keeping in touch with those people over the years, kind of as part of your personal board of directors for your career. I just had no idea, and I think I was kind of very late to that game in many ways.
Yes, certainly. I think a lot of us can absolutely relate to that. I mean, I remember just anecdotally, distinctly for me, folks being privy to information or opportunities that I, about the culture of the legal world that I didn't necessarily know. And, they, before they even entered law school, they're talking to their sometimes parents, sometimes aunties and uncles, and just kind of getting the brief overview of what it's going to be like, what the culture is like. And for people like you and me, it's like, I kind of went into it blind. We kind of had to figure out that what clerkships really meant on a resume too. So
for sure. I mean, and it's just like, I remember when I took my clerkship and I clerked on the Fifth Circuit in Houston, my mom's like, wait, how much does this pay? And how does that compare to what you'd be making in a law firm? And I was a summer associate at a couple of firms. And she was, thrilled with the money from just the summer associate job, but she just couldn't understand why I was doing the clerkship. And I've heard of a lot of first generation law students whose parents were, all similarly confused. My husband came from a different background, and he was much more clued in than I was. We met in law school, and I remember, one of my first discussions with him where, when we first met as law students, and he said, "Are you going to do a journal?" And I said, "What is that? I have no idea." And it's just things like that I think, first generation law students, people who don't know a lot of lawyers, or people who don't come from a background where a lot of lawyers growing up, that you just don't have that those kinds of insights.
Yeah, absolutely. And my response would have been, yes, I do keep a daily journal, but you cannot read it. So I guess I guess it sounds like we had a lot of the similar experiences, and I'm curious what you did to kind of close that information gap. That if anything you did during law school to seek out advice or anything like that.
I think I was still it was a very gradual process. And I really don't think it was probably until I would say moved to DC, which is about 20 years ago, that I really started doing it more. DC is such a, relationship focused town. And it wasn't until I was a practicing lawyer, I think, that I really began uh, trying to make those connections. I mean, in law school, I felt like I was very lost. I was doing the best I could with classes. I had known early on that I wanted to be a litigator, so I was, focused on that. I did some clinics, but I actually did not develop the kinds of relationships with professors that I think would have benefited me greatly down the line. I mean, somehow it seemed a little bit um, presumptuous or awkward to try to meet with professors. I knew that there were other students at the school who were doing that, and it just seemed very scary to me and it was like, why would they want to talk to me? And so I did very, very little of what I think a lot of students were doing, which is, going to office hours, asking professors to supervise their writing projects. I even knew some students who were inviting professors over to their apartments for dinner, and stuff like that. And I just never would have imagined that. I got a little bit better with that as I, went out into the working world. I got to know my judge pretty well. I was using her as a sounding board. She was great in terms of giving advice. And found some early mentors at Jenner that I began to feel more comfortable talking to about career stuff. I also think that as I spent more time in the legal world, I became more attuned to the fact about how helpful it is to have people to bounce ideas off of and to ask for advice. So I got better with it over time. But in law school, I really just wasn't doing any of it. I would encourage anybody who's in law school on this on this webinar, just don't be shy about it. My husband teaches at GW, and he's always surprised by really sometimes how few people come to office hours. I have for many years given out my contact information, which I will do at the end of this session too, and encourage people to call me up. And I'm always surprised by how few people, do that. Or maybe they just don't like me very much, really. But, I think people are very willing as a general matter to want to help, and to really welcome, more junior attorneys reaching out to them. And so really don't be shy about that. I think I had great resources in law school that I just didn't take advantage of or know how to take advantage of.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Like you, I've always wanted to be a litigator, but even under that umbrella of litigation, right? There's so many different fields, so many different types of jobs that entails that I had no idea what those roles really encompass. So it wasn't until a professor actually really opened my eyes to like the different types of litigation that there is, and really helped me honed in my what I wanted to do and where my passions were. So I definitely agree, and I can understand how daunting it is to go to office hours and just ask these types of questions. But I also do encourage our audience to do the same. So thank you for talking about your experience as a law student. I mean, if there are any other resources that you wish that you knew about as a law student that you would implore our audience to take advantage of, aside from the professors, that is?
No, I actually, bar groups and affinity groups, I wish I had taken more advantage of. And, I sort of chalk this up a little bit again to, my background growing up where, there was always something, socializing was discouraged a little bit because it was like, well, what are you doing? But having this network of people, whether it's AEF or APAVA, or maybe it's a group that's focused on a substantive area of the law that you're interested in. It's so helpful. And I always tell people, this is also something that I was very late coming to, that mentors and sponsors and people who can give you advice and help you along the way. Certainly more senior people are great for that, but please don't overlook your contemporaries. So people that you went to law school with, people that you served with on boards like AEF. And and in many ways, that kind of relationship building is easier because it can be really scary or awkward to reach out to a much more senior person. And for a long time, when I intellectually realized, okay, I need to be doing this, I was very focused on the senior partner in the firm, or the general counsel of a client or something like that, or a senior, much more senior kind of government official. But some of my really best contacts in all of those spheres have been my contemporaries. So in terms of my government jobs, a lot of those opportunities came up, or I was made aware of them by just friends, people I'd gone to law school with, or people I had been, a fellow associate from a law firm saying, here's an opportunity. When my announcement about joining Skadden came out, I actually had someone that I served on the board with when we were with AEF. So that's now 15 or 16 years ago. She's now in-house, and she reached out and said, hey, we haven't been in touch for a little bit, but we've now I'm in-house, and if you want to come out here and do some business development, give me a call and I'll set up some meetings for you. And I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think is hard to see coming. Now, when I was a junior person, people would say to me, with the business development thing, a certain part of it is just kind of getting old enough to where your friends and your law school classmates and your former colleagues are in-house and they're able to give you business. And I was very skeptical of that because I just couldn't imagine knowing anybody as old as some of these old general counsels, like ancient people. And now I've got, lots of friends, like people I worked with at Jenner years ago who have gone in-house, and now they're GC of a publicly traded company, and they've said to me, like, let me know what I can do to help. But those are the kind of relationships that, are very important, and please don't overlook, because you can get lots of good advice from older people. But in terms of those very and you can obviously get great job connections, and they can set you up with some terrific opportunities, but your own contemporaries are oftentimes kind of the best people who can help you down the road.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for that. So I guess a natural transition now would just be talking about your experiences as a first generation, not law student, but as an attorney. Mm-hmm. So you have your JD in hand, you go clerk for the Fifth Circuit, and then you landed at Jenner, I believe. And then mm-hmm. So I kind of want to talk about that experience as a first generation Asian American attorney. What was your experience like going into the legal practice? Did you any noticeable? Yeah, please.
I'm curious to I love talking with people about this because oftentimes people love sharing stories about what it's like if you're a first generation lawyer, kind of going into that world. I was a summer associate at a couple several law firms in Dallas and Houston. when I was a law student, and that was just a new world to me, because we just didn't eat out very much. When we did, it was usually like, at a local Chinese place, and so going into a summer associateship and like eating out, twice a day at these very fancy restaurants, that was so strange to me. And this whole story, it's stereotypical, but when people talk about, I didn't know what fork to use and whatnot, like I really had no idea. Um, what it was like. I mean, a 3-course kind of Western style meal was really foreign, and it was really scary. So that was a learning experience. And it was a challenge. I think this is a challenge for everybody, but maybe particularly those of us who are new to the legal profession. When I was started as an associate, it's a hard balance figuring out um, how assertive to be, and and that sort of thing. So, you know, I do think that as a more junior lawyer, a big part of your job is learning your craft. And there's a lot of, as a litigator, lots of research and writing. Obviously, you're deferential to the people who are more senior than you are. But a lot of times, I think that during review time, the partners will say, well, this person is really great at doing research and is a good writer and is very responsive, but I just wish she would speak up more. She doesn't seem confident, and wish that she would be sort of more forthcoming about, ideas. And that's really hard to figure out. So that was, I think, a challenge for me when I was starting out. It was a challenge for me for um, a really long time, and really still remains a challenge. Um, but trying to figure out that balance between kind of head down, doing the work. Of course, you have to do great work. Of course, you have to be very, very responsive, to your clients and your bosses in any legal job. But figuring out kind of when to speak up and how to do it in a way that was productive. Again, I think it's a challenge for all lawyers, especially junior lawyers, but was very, I think, can be especially tough for first generation lawyers. And Hui, I'm sure I'm very interested to hear how kind of you've navigated that too. I think it's just kind of an ongoing question.
Yeah, certainly, and definitely as junior attorneys, I mean, it's what I call is the art of the pushback. Just voicing your disagreement, dissents, especially to folks who have sometimes decades more experience than you. I think for me at least, as a more junior attorney, is always my biggest weapon is always being prepared. Although they may have the folks may have the experience and deep knowledge of everything that's going on in a specific issue. Preparing to understand whether it be a specific a judge or a recent ruling or whatever, just being able to at least provide an anecdote or a reasoning as to why there may be an option B or C. I think that's been my best approach so far. But but yeah, it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah, and I think culturally, for me, and I've talked a lot about kind of, my background growing up, it did not come naturally at all. Even raising my hand in class when I was in elementary school and middle school and high school didn't come naturally to me. I was almost completely silent in my law school classes. I found it absolutely terrifying to say anything. It felt to me like everyone else in the class had better ideas and were better prepared, and they like to talk a lot. So sometimes it was hard just to get a word in edgewise. And I felt like I had to really, and I just took a step back. So that it was really a very scary thing. I have to say it continues to remain a challenge. I don't know whether, this is a cultural thing from a kind of a more traditional Asian upbringing like I had, or if, other people of different backgrounds feel this too. But, I was still feeling it as, as the U.S. attorney in D.C., I'd have these meetings at the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, which I ultimately became the chair of, with other U.S. attorneys. And, sometimes I'd think to myself, like, gosh, like, A, I can't believe I'm here. And B, like, I bet they all know like so much more about whatever the case, the issue is than I do. And it just feels weird, you know, speaking up and saying something. And so, you know, that's still something that I struggle with. I don't think I'm ever going to stop struggling with it because it is a very deeply ingrained thing. And part of it, I'm sure, is you know, a personality thing rather than a cultural thing. But you know, it just, for me, it never completely goes away.
Yeah, I'm curious now, actually, from the culture aspect. I've had the experience of, because I'm sometimes a little bit more vocal, and defy the, I guess, stereotypes of what East Asian folks are, you know, head down, hardworking, that, you know, that type of stereotype. And sometimes I find that it perhaps rubs me the wrong way. Have you ever felt like when you're pushing back or just speaking your mind on a certain issue that you defy the stereotype or defy someone's preconception of how your persona and personality should be?
Yeah, you know, and it's funny because both two things have happened. Sometimes get that where people are just surprised, and I think that because maybe they were expecting a different approach or maybe a more deferential approach, that they feel like I was more aggressive than I really was. You know, such that I think something like that coming from, you know, someone else may have been viewed as kind of less aggressive than the exact same thing coming from me. I've also had exactly the opposite kind of reaction where I feel like, you know, I've been pretty outspoken, and maybe again, like, I don't know whether this is my perception or not, but you know, then people will say, "Oh, you're just so quiet. You're awfully quiet over there." Like, I get that a lot, and I don't know that. You know, someone who looked different or maybe came from a different background would get the same thing. Like, I have heard it said of, you know, people with very similar career backgrounds to me, but are, you know, older white men. And then people, what they say about, you know, those guys is, yeah, you know, he's like Obi-Wan, you know, when he just speaks when he's got something really wise to say, and you better listen up. But, you know, I feel like with me, a lot of times it's like, "Oh, Jessie, you're so quiet over there." But I think that there is definitely, you know, people's views of your conduct are colored by, you know, their expectations, you know, and maybe stereotypes that are deeply ingrained in our society.
Gotcha. And yeah, I mean, we could probably spend the rest of the event talking about this issue, but in the interest of time.
Let me add just one thing, which is that,
yeah,
you know,
please.
in terms of the art of the pushback, which is a phrase that I really, really like, and I'm gonna steal it from you and start using
Please
it. You know, you know, as I've gotten older, I've realized that senior lawyers, you know, they have experience, and I think they have a sense of you know, dynamics that you know, probably a lot of lawyers don't have by virtue of their experience, and perhaps the fact that they see a fuller picture of any particular case or situation than, you know, a younger attorney who's, you know, just working on a research project or something like that might see. So obviously they have that advantage, but they definitely don't know any more than you do about the facts or the law of any particular case. And this is not to suggest that, you know, you should be disrespectful or anything like that, but you know, you've got to realize in terms of speaking up and pushing back, like, I realized when I became the U.S. attorney, you know, it occurred to me one day, I was like, when I was an AUSA and I served under these U.S. attorneys who I admired and liked a lot, and they were really great lawyers and great leaders. And I was like, but I assumed they knew everything. You know, I assumed that whatever issue came up, they knew how to deal with it. They knew immediately what the right thing was to do. But I don't. I'm like, there's all this stuff and it comes up to me, and I really don't have any clue what to do. I mean, I have some sense of it, and I'll talk it through with people, and I'll think about it and make the best decision I can. But I was like, I don't know all the answers. And then I realized maybe those other people didn't know all the answers either. And that was probably the scariest experience I had as a leader of that office, was that there are people who, you know, who are very, very senior, and they're in charge, and they do not know all the answers. And they're feeling their way around. They've got, you know, people to help them, and they've got experience, and they're smart, and they're capable. And so, they probably will come to the right answer or to the best answer. But, they don't, it's not like some problem comes up and they're like, yep, that's, that's the right answer. We're all kind of working through it together. And I think that is true, at every level.
Yeah.
So please don't
Well said.
hesitate to push back.
Yeah. Yep. Still learning that myself. So
we're all learning that. We are all learning that.
Good. So the next topic is something that's very important to AEF specifically, and that's mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
And we've touched on it a little bit, but as you know, AEF, one of our biggest missions is fostering mentorships for law students, meaningful mentorships. And based on my conversation with you, I know that you do serve as a mentor, whether officially or unofficially. So I guess my immediate question is, either as a partner at a law firm or a highly distinguished attorney for the DOJ, how do you make the time to continue mentoring junior attorneys?
It's just I think you can make the time for anything if you want to do it enough. And I really, really want to do it. It's very important to me. And so I make the time. I don't think I've ever said no to anybody who's asked for, coffee or a call. If that has happened, I apologize and was not intentional. It's certainly possible that I've missed emails, but I made a decision, pretty early on in my career, that I just wouldn't say no to people who wanted to talk through career questions or bounce ideas off me. And so I've always really tried hard to do that. In some ways, I actually think it's been easier during the pandemic because it used to be harder when I was traveling more and when people were doing kind of more things that took them away from home. But now you can do, I think Zoom works fantastically. I was very scared when all of this happened, that how would we continue to kind of do business? And I've been very impressed with Zoom and WebEx and really a lot of the platforms that allow people to see each other and talk. So in many ways it's easier because people are around a lot of the time, and it's easy to hop on a phone call and or on a Zoom and kind of talk things through. So I really think it's just kind of a matter of commitment to that particular and I think it's I personally view it as a duty of more senior attorneys to help those who come after them. I maybe not everybody sees it that way. And, there are always going to be limitations on how much time you can give at any particular moment. If you're in the middle of a trial or something like that, you just may not have the time immediately. But I think over, the course of a year and certainly over the course of a, career, there are so many opportunities to do that. And I'm very committed to it.
That's great. That's great. And as a junior attorney, as a mentee, we certainly appreciate it. We're a bit up against the time, and we could also spend the entire event on this topic. But I do want to kind of double back on something we talked about earlier. Is that how it may be daunting for law students or even junior attorneys to reach out to more senior folks and ask them for, I don't know, a cup of coffee or just building that mentorship. Do you have any advice as to how you can approach that cold email, cold call, what have you, so we can open that conversation more effectively?
Definitely. So one thing is, if I don't discourage people at all from making cold calls. But if there's someone that you're looking to get in touch with and you have a connection to them, like a mutual friend or something, I would definitely take advantage of that, and get the introduction from the mutual friend who will say, my friend so-and-so would love to talk to you about XYZ. That definitely, I think for most people, just kind of catches their attention a little bit more quickly. And I think you're likely to get a faster response that way. For the cold call, I think I found that people get better responses when they're fairly first specific about, what they want to talk about, and show that they have, some knowledge already about the person they're reaching out to. So it might say like, and somewhere you were writing to me, it doesn't have to be this, it could be anything. And I will always respond. But I think you might get a better response if you say, look, I'm very interested in exploring jobs at DOJ or the US Attorney's Office, or deciding whether I want to practice criminal law or something like that. I'd like to talk to you about that. Can we, set up a call, for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes? I probably would, keep it to, and I do think that if you set out a time in your like a period of time, 15-minute call, 20-minute call, I think that makes it more comfortable for a lot of people, because they feel like, okay, this is the person who's got a pretty focused conversation that they want to have, and they're acknowledging that they only want 15 or 20 minutes. Every time I have said yes to a situation like that, like we've ended up talking longer, and I love it, and it doesn't matter. But I think that when you say, it's a lot scarier for people when they're getting cold emails, when they say like, hey, like I just like to get to know you and like talk about my career, and they're like, oh my gosh, maybe this is like an hour-long, 2-hour-long conversation. So I think being more focused, and with that first one, outreach, kind of putting some time limits around it, can often just make people, the person on the receiving end of that email, more comfortable and more likely to reach out to you. And then the other thing that I would say is that for me, I really love hearing again and again from mentees. And so this just sort of goes back to maybe what I was saying before. Most people I found really like helping other people, and they like hearing how things turned out. So I love it when I have a conversation, coffee with someone who wants to be in AUSA, and then 6 months later or 3 months later, I get an update that says, hey, I've just got an internship at X office, and would love to keep in touch, or whatever. I like hearing new developments. And to me, the best example of a successful mentor-mentee relationship is when you stop calling it a mentor-mentee relationship, and it becomes a friend relationship. And I've had, people, I was just talking to somebody yesterday who I've kept in touch with over the years, but he was someone that I met at an APAPA convention, and reached out to me afterwards and said, here's kind of things that I'm interested in doing, and has stayed in touch. It hasn't been a phone call every day or something like that, but it's been, every a couple times a year for a while, and or maybe more frequently as he was, looking at specific jobs and that sort of thing. But I wouldn't call him a mentee anymore. That's too formal a term for that kind of relationship. That's somebody that I've gotten to know, that I have interests in common with, and that's a friend who texts me, and we talk, and he tells me what's going on in his career and his life. That's where you want to get, I think.
It's a great goal to be at. So I see that we're still up against it, and I do want to leave some time for questions. So again, for the audience, if you have any questions for Jessie, please do feel free to throw it in the chat here, as we got folks monitoring it. But before we get to the questions, I want to talk about something that's probably in the immediate minds of the law students right now, and that's interviewing and application season.
Yeah.
As you know, OCIs and application deadlines are right around the corner. So I want to pick your brain a little bit for some, I'd be remiss not to pick your brain for some tips for applications and whatnot. So do you have any advice for our audience as to how law students or junior attorneys can stick out in an application?
Mm-hmm. So, I think I'm going to put aside all of the usual things about, your grades and your writing sample and all of that stuff, because I think that's kind of a given. To me, the biggest thing that will get you a second look or get you hired is showing that you really want to do the kind of work that the office that you're applying to does, and that you want to do it there, and kind of making it clear why that is. So, I'll give you a couple examples. In the law firm context, there are a bazillion law firms out there. And the question I've always had when I was interviewing potential associates, as a law firm partner was, why do you want to come to our firm? Why do you want to come to this office of our firm? And what is it about the work that we do here that is attractive to you? So, basically, are we just another law firm to fill out your OCI list, or are you very targeted to us? Same thing at the U.S. Attorney's Office. There are many, let's say, great government lawyer jobs. There are 115,000 people who work at DOJ. Not all of those are lawyers, but there are tens of thousands of lawyers who work at DOJ. So, why do you want to work at DOJ? Why do you want to work at a U.S. Attorney's Office as opposed to Main Justice? Why do you want to work at this U.S. Attorney's Office? What is it about, do you understand the work that we do? And why do you want to do it, and why do you want to do it here? And that was always the question. Once you get past that kind of threshold of is this person a student and a good writer, that's like, why do you want to be here, and why are you a good fit for us, and why are we a good fit for you? It's hard to come through in a cover letter, I will say. I think it's really that's something you can kind of hammer home in an interview, but it's hard in a cover letter. And frankly, I've never found cover letters all that useful when I've been in the hiring position, and I find them really annoying and hard to write when I'm in the application side. But people seem to expect them. And if you can make them stand out, that's fantastic. But I just find it fairly challenging to figure out how to do that.
Got it. I guess a follow-up question to that is these answers about why the specific office, why this being the DOJ. Was there like a common characteristic that you would categorize as a good answer? Like, is there some common theme that was well received for you?
I think knowing the office, or knowing, the job that you're applying for, having talked to some people and, maybe who had done that job. And again, this is where having relationships is really helpful, because if you're able to talk to people who are already in the office, or people who've had the job that you're applying for, I think it makes you sound, much more intelligent about and give a better answer to those questions about why you want to be here. But showing the enthusiasm and the knowledge of what the job is, I don't know that there's a specific, formulation of that has been, I found more effective than others, but that's, to me, kind of the key once you get an interview.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm sure everyone would appreciate your insight, especially nowadays. People are anxious about the interview and application process. So we did have a question, and it was actually a topic that I didn't think I was going to be able to get to, that I'm personally fascinated about, is your experience in transitioning from the private to the public sector, and vice versa, really, and being able to achieve just high distinction in both sectors. What made your decision to go into the government and then transition out of the government and go into the private sector?
My initial decision to go into the public sector was, I had kind of always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do some form of public service, probably as a prosecutor. I told you, the story about being inspired about, Rudy Giuliani's work fighting the mob in New York. So that was always something that I wanted to do. I also did have law school loans, and so I had to go and pay those off first before I could really realistically consider doing that. I, like you, always wanted to be a litigator, and I wanted to be in the courtroom, and that's hard to come by in big firms. It's probably harder now even than it was 20 years ago, but it was already very hard then. And so I began looking around at opportunities, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. was, we try a lot of cases there because we have the Superior Court docket as well. And so that just seemed like it really kind of married together all of the things that I was looking for. And then opportunities came up, and what I would encourage the audience to is, when things come up, be very open to saying yes. Change is hard, and sometimes it's a little bit risky. Like when I had the opportunity to go to the National Security Division, that office was brand new, and I was part of the first team. to be in that front office. And so it was a little bit scary. It was like, well, I don't really know what this is going to be like. And it's, I'm finally settled in after 4 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office, but it was one of the best decisions I made and led to lots and lots of other opportunities down the road. So do be open. I've just kind of gone back and forth. I mean, I've been a political appointee a couple of times. So of course, when the administration ends, people from the outgoing administration go back into the private sector. But I would probably do it anyway, just because the two are very, it's really interesting to me to have that kind of variety. I think there are things, as you and I have talked about, that you learn in the private sector that you might not learn if you stayed in government for your whole career, and vice versa. And I'll give you one example now that's very recent. I spent a lot of my career in the private sector in a very litigation focused firm. Jenner's, very heavily litigation, and less so, on the M&A transactional side. And Skadden is different. Very strong M&A practice, strong litigation practice too, but kind of started out and still is a M&A firm in many ways. And so I have been learning things in the last 2 months that I've been here that I never thought I would learn. Like I've been learning, all about kind of the different kinds of M&A transactions, what happens in the course of an M&A. I got Adam's laughing because he was at Skadden for so long, but all of this stuff, like what's just learning all the stuff that happens along the way, and due diligence and data rooms and all of this stuff. But it's really unique because that's a key part of our economic sector, right? I mean, that's a major part of what makes this country hum along is M&A transactions, acquisitions, all the stuff that happens on the corporate side, which I don't think I would have really learned about at all if I had been in government my whole career. Because while government does deal with companies, you just don't get that insight into this is how the business side really works. And if conversely, I think if I were to spend my whole life in private practice, like I wouldn't get the chance to think about, well, this is how government enforcers think about issues. One area that's also a very recent example is, for example, DOJ just put out a cryptocurrency enforcement framework that talks about DOJ's approach to cryptocurrency and kind of outline some of the things about crypto that they find to be concerning. I think for the private sector, the primary focus has been on just the incredible innovation of the blockchain and crypto and fintech. But coming from DOJ and having done a lot of kind of criminal cases and investigations that involved crypto, I think I'm in better position to advise clients about, okay, if you're going to think about doing, this is how, I think the government regulators are going to look at it. These are the concerns that they're going to have. This is what they're going to expect of you in terms of compliance. And that's a perspective that I think, again, is hard to get without having, been in government a little bit. So definitely kind of both the public and private sectors. And of course, there's other areas like, public interest law, which we haven't talked about at all. But in every job and every kind of job, you get a perspective that you probably wouldn't have if you had never taken that job. So I love the revolving door in DC, I think in many ways it kind of makes for better lawyers all around.
Great. And I know there's a lot of 3Ls in the audience, as well as new associates. And I guess a question that does come up, and you probably be best suited to answer this given your experience in both sectors. We talked a lot about the differences in the sectors so far. Is there a common theme or like a cross-sector best practice that you notice in both the public and the private sector? Yeah.
I think you being really and probably the thing that comes most to mind is um, knowing your case or your transaction, or whatever it is that you do, kind of knowing the facts and the law, um, inside and out. That's always, I think, the made for the best. That's a hallmark of the best lawyers on in both the private sector and the public sector. So the best AUSAs I've seen, they know the cases, they know every document, or they've talked to every witness. They know exactly what was said in every grand jury session. And same thing on the private sector side. The best M&A lawyers I've seen know all of the details of um, the draft agreements that they're marking up. They can remember 2 versions back what was discussed, what was said. They know their client's business like it was their own. The best private sector litigation folks, same way. They know all the facts, they know everything that was said in the deposition, but just that kind of focus on detail is something that I think just marks almost an insatiable desire to know more about a case or a transaction. I think is a common hallmark of kind of the best lawyers that I've seen on both the government and the private sector side.
Great. Well, we won't be able to get through all the questions. We finished just at the at our end mark. So thank you, Jessie. We really do appreciate you taking time, and your perspective, I'm sure, was invaluable for our audience member and truly for myself as well. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you. And, thank you to AEF for sponsoring this. This was a lot of fun. I hope it was helpful. I'm on Skadden's website, so if you look up my name, you should be able to find my profile. My email is jessie.liu@skadden.com, so pretty easy. And you should take me at my word and, get in touch if you want to talk about anything. And hopefully I will see you at your gala, if not before then.
Yes. Thank you, Jessie, for that plug as well.
Yes.
All right.
Always happy to help you advertise. Yep. All right. Well, thanks again. It was really great being here.